All right, welcome back on this nice sunny Wednesday. Should be pretty nice today, so hopefully you guys will find some time to get outside and enjoy the weather a little bit. Gonna be even nicer this weekend. Today we're gonna cover section four and work our way into just a little bit of section five. Just because section five is so long, I want to definitely be able to finish it tomorrow. So that's kind of the plan for today. Section 4. In the 1960s, a youthful culture arose that promoted freedom and individuality. Its new attitudes about personal relationships, drugs, and music will shock many Americans. So, in the 1960s, like the beatniks of the 50s, people adopted values that ran counter to or against social customs, or what is referred to as the counterculture. So, in other words, we are talking about hippies or people who were aware of the latest styles that wanted to reject traditional ways of life in favor of change and individual choice. So, beatniks, remember we talked about them in the 50s. They kind of rejected everybody's material values, things like this. And we said they were the early version of the hippie. Well, guess what, guys? We're in the 60s now and we're in the full blown hippies. Many men and women wore their hair long, and styles of clothing would become looser. So people started wearing a much baggier clothing. Guys started growing out their hair. Men had longer beards, bigger beards. Popular clothing among the youth would include bib overalls, bell-bottom pants, flannel shirts, and bandanas or headbands. All became part of very fashionable trends. And the conformity and materialism of the 1950s would be abandoned as the hippies sought comfort and spirituality and uniqueness of the individual. So they're going to stop worrying about materialism as much, and they're going to seek more comfort and spirituality. Um, and so that's why hippies kind of always seem out there a little bit more. Well, that and several other reasons that we will talk about. The counterculture also promoted a sexual revolution. There was more open discussion about sexual subjects, and more books on human sexuality would be published. And colleges offer classes on sexual education, which was basically unheard of up until this point. That whole topic was basically avoided in schools altogether. Men and women experimented with new living patterns, like living together or in communal groups, where chores and property were shared. Prior to this, men and women really never lived together unless they were married. If they were dating, still never lived together. Things like that. They never lived together until they were actually married. And some members of the counterculture will turn to psychedelic drugs, which contain powerful chemicals that cause the brain to behave abnormally and or hallucinate. Um, and so that's why you get that whole spaced out view on hippies because of the drugs they took. So drugs like LSD would become more widespread in the 1950s, and the danger of death from an overdose or accident while under the influence of the drug would be very, very real. LSD is a super, super dangerous drug, and it can kill you very, very easily if you're not. Well, it can kill you even if you are careful. LSD puts nice little lines across the top of your brain, and should those lines ever cross, well, then you die. In LSD, sometimes they would have really bad trips and they would end up stabbing each other or someone else or themselves. It's just a crazy, powerful drug that no one should ever, ever take. Okay, there's my thing. Don't do LSD. That stuff is very bad. The other drug, marijuana, used to become common among middle class college students and also returning Vietnam veterans. Marijuana was very prevalent in Vietnam, um, as well as several other drugs. But marijuana would be the one that really comes back from Vietnam. And so it starts becoming more and more popular with the youth and especially among college age students, middle class, that could afford to buy that kind of thing. The music of the time also reflected and contributed to the cultural changes as rock and roll would evolve into protest music as the war in Vietnam expanded and the death toll mounted. Um, a new kind of rock music reflected the rebellious spirit of the era, with new rock icons like the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and Jimi Hendrix. Um, if you guys don't know what kind of music it is, ask your parents and or grandparents. They will know who all those bands are. Jimi Hendrix would be the first person to ever put the Star Spangled Banner into rock and roll style. And if you guys get bored later, definitely give that a look. Jimi Hendrix National Anthem. It's cool to listen to for a little bit. Definitely don't advise listening to the full 7 minutes of the song because that is ridiculously long. But it's kind of a unique spin. Definitely go ahead, check out the Rolling Stones, Beatles, Jim Morrison, and the Doors. Awesome bands. Janis Joplin's really good. Definitely check them out. And so a lot of these bands, not necessarily these bands, well, Jimi Hendrix is there, but at Woodstock, New York, 400,000 people gather to hear famous bands and singers in a spirit of fellowship and peace. Oh, Joan Baez, Santana, CCR, that is Creedence Clearwater Revival, Sly and the Family Stone, The Who, Jefferson Airplane, Jimi Hendrix will all um, play at different points throughout the Woodstock concert. TV viewers saw widespread drug use, sex, and nudity, which shocked and offended many middle class Americans because it's so against their values. And that's why they were so shocked by this whole thing. Um, and to many people, the counterculture reflected a rejection of morals and honored social values. So Woodstock, its main thing was it's all about peace and fellowship. That's why all these bands showed up. It's kind of an impromptu thing. All these bands showed up, played music, and so they're going to try to do it again at Altamont Speedway in California in December of 1969. They're going to have 300,000 people there for a Rolling Stones concert. But when violence erupts, it contradicts the message of peace and love of the counterculture. Um, and I mean, the violence erupted because, well, a big biker gang known as Hell's Angels showed up and kind of caused a riot. So it wasn't necessarily the counterculture's fault that the riot broke out. But, well, the whole concert erupting into a riot will definitely go against the message of peace and love. And because most of the hippies came from white middle class America, it is ironic that they too felt a need to fit in and were not immune to the advertising techniques of corporate America. Hippies, like their parents, were materialistic in their own ways, such as clothing, music, they collected records, all their different clothes, things like this. They're very materialistic on more of a basic level than what their parents were with like electronics and things like that. And when the counterculture fell apart by the mid 1970s, most of the anti establishment hippies would blend back into the mainstream culture and accept a more traditional role in American society. So, that right there is the end of section 4. And right now I'm looking to see how far into section 5 we need to get today. Um, well, we'll cover at least A and B, probably. So, um, Section 5, the end of the Vietnam War. So now we're going to talk about the Vietnam War winding down and kind of some of the protests that went along with it. So by 1968, the anti-war movement was growing stronger. Against the advice of Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, LBJ continued to increase troop levels in Vietnam and to authorize bombing raids on North Vietnam when he knew U.S. public opinion was against it. So U.S. public opinion at this time, get out of Vietnam. We don't want to be there. And well, why are we bombing them? There's no point in bombing North Vietnam. And so, yeah, LBJ is still going to be doing it. The Democratic Party was splitting apart as the 1968 election approached now. Anti-war candidate Eugene McCarthy almost beat President Johnson in the New Hampshire Democratic primary, and Senator Robert Kennedy, who also opposed the war, entered the race against LBJ now at this point. So when Bobby Kennedy or Robert Kennedy, I'm going to call him Bobby Kennedy because that's what everybody calls him. Bobby Kennedy saw that Johnson was weak after Eugene McCarthy almost beats him. He's going to decide to run for president now. And Robert Kennedy is the brother of John F. Kennedy. So, realizing at this point that he had basically lost the base of support, LBJ announced that he would not run for re-election in 1968. So, because he's doing so poorly, LBJ is like, "Oh, I got one more term, but I'm not going to run for it." So, sorry, spurred by LBJ's halting of bombing in of North Vietnam, the North Vietnamese agreed to begin peaceful negotiations in the with the U.S. at the Paris peace talks. So at this point in time, because LBJ stops the bombing, North Vietnam is like, all right, yeah, we're willing to have some peace talks now, which would have been nice to have a couple of years earlier, as you will find out, because, well, we're in Vietnam until 1972. So the election of 1968 was plagued by tragedy. After the assassination of Bobby Kennedy in June, the shaken Democratic Party turned to Vice President Hubert Humphrey as their only viable candidate for president. Senator Eugene McCarthy simply did not have enough support from traditional Democrats, therefore, he was not an electable candidate. So they're going to turn to Hubert Humphrey. Also, just so you guys know, you might want to write this down on the margin. The assassin who killed Robert Kennedy was Sirhan Sirhan. We'll talk more about that next chapter. I know, Ben, you'll love it when I say we'll talk more about it next chapter. The Republicans turned to Richard Nixon, who confidently claimed to have a plan to secure an honorable end to the Vietnam War. He never really said what his plan was, but, well, the man's got a plan, and his plan is to end the Vietnam War. And that's all he says. So, here is our electoral map, and this will be the last thing we really cover today. As you can see, Richard Nixon's in red, Hubert Humphrey is in blue, and, well, we'll talk about that awesome guy that got all the yellow states. And if you notice which ones are the yellow states of the most, which we call the deep south of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas, um, yeah, he still took those states. Uh, a third party candidate will take those, and we'll talk more about that third party candidate much later. Well, not that much later. We'll talk about it in chapter 22. But next week. And here's where I'm going to leave you guys for today. There will be a couple questions in a Google form, not too many today, probably just 3 or 4. So please make sure you guys get that done. Get caught up on your homework, please, because I'm going through and grading it a lot more frequently now, and it gets frustrating when, well, a lot of you guys have missing assignments and aren't doing anything. So keep up the hard work. And if you have any questions, please let me know.